All right. Good afternoon, everyone. This is the first session on game theory. Game theory is essentially your semester 5, right? So, all of you who are joining me are, as I understand, from semester 5, and you are encountering game theory for the first time. Am I correct? Just whatever answers you have, I encourage you that you please write it in the chat box rather than unmuting yourself, because then it will come in the recording as well. So if you have any questions, or if you want to answer something, or you want to raise your hand, please use the chat box. So all of you are encountering game theory for the first time, and all of you are in your third year, the first semester of your third year. Is that correct? All right. Okay, so what we'll do is today's session will be more of an introductory session about game theory, that I am assuming that you guys basically don't know anything about game theory. Is my assumption more or less correct? Because I will be starting from the scratch and assuming that basically there is no understanding. So are we okay with that? Okay, great. So I will take it like that. We will begin with understanding what game theory is. Now, at the end of this session, you will get two things. Of course, you will get the recorded version, which will be uploaded. You will also get a highlighted version of the reference that we will be using. So I will be strictly following your syllabus, strictly following the references that are there in your syllabus, right? So which are prescribed by DU. So that means that we'll start with Osborne and then we will go to Watson. ठीक है ना? तो I will give you the highlighted reference. So for every portion we cover, I'll highlight the references which are relevant, and I will highlight it according to like whatever is more important, less important. So a highlighted PDF will help you revise stuff easily. Secondly, most of the time, so right now we are not going to do it on the PDF, or we are not going to directly read things from the book. I'm going to do board work, and I will share a PDF of that board work as well. So all that will also be shared with you. Okay. So so that whenever you need to revise, or whenever you need to make notes later for your exams, you can have all that handy. Okay. So let's begin. Let's start it. Any questions, any confusions you have, you write it in the chat box, or rather to make it more orderly, you can raise your hand, and once I'm finished, say with a particular topic, and then we can address whatever doubts you have. Okay, cool, let's begin. All right, is the board visible to everyone? The board is visible, right? Okay, so let's start with the very basic. Let's see what you understand by what you so far. So you have attended some classes on game theory. You have had your midterm or something? So can you tell me what you understand by game theory? What is exactly game theory, and why, in a sense, why do we need a separate study for game theory rather than just continuing what we have been doing for 2 years? Any guesses? So Rajesh has said that it is about taking strategic decisions in real life issues. Well, that is exactly correct, right? So that is the case. Not necessarily like all issues are real life issues. Like in case of market operations What exactly do you mean by that? Just a little more fleshing it out. All right, no worries. Okay, got it. All right, Rajesh. So Rajesh is exactly correct. What this means, how is it different from the kind of things that we were doing in economics so far? Is that it involves decisions that are what are called strategic. And what exactly does it mean, strategic? Is that basically decision makers, economic agents as we like to call them, they interact with each other, right? So far what we have been doing in economics is that whenever we are looking at any sort of decision making, it so happens that we are looking at it from, say, an individual perspective. So this is what we did in micro में हमने क्या किया था, that you had a profit or utility maximizing individual, or you had a profit maximizing firm, and all of these were taking some things as given, right? So when we were looking at a perfectly competitive firm, when we were looking at an individual who is, say, buying something, who is deciding how to maximize her utility given a particular budget, we were taking everyone else as passive, right? So this is the case. So what we had was that all the participants were passive, and this individual was navigating there, and this individual was just making choices without thinking that what others are doing, essentially also without thinking that how their actions are going to affect her own outcomes, right? But now we are in the realm of looking at problems which are called multi-person decision making problems. Okay, so these are the cases where your decision makers interact. Okay, and other economic agents are not passive anymore. So some of the examples that you can think about it, and these are the kind of cases where we need other market participants to be humans as well, to be entities with their own brains, with their own utility maximizing behavior. ठीक है, तो ऐसे सोचो कि जैसे हम when we are thinking about, say, a perfectly competitive market, right? Then as an individual, I am just thinking like that, okay, I have this much money and this is what I like, this is the bundle that will maximize my utility. अभी तक हम यही करते आए हैं. Now we have to think, इसी situation में we also dealt with situations where we said that how a market equilibrium is reached, that if there is an excess demand, right, then the sellers bid down the price, if there is an excess supply, the sellers bid down the price, and then we reach a new equilibrium at a lower price. Similarly, if there is an excess demand, the demanders bid up the price, right, and then there is a new higher price that brings equilibrium in the system. So how this bidding happens, how any equilibrium is reached, when we think about that, then we are in a game theoretic situation. So when we are thinking of as an individual of how to maximize a utility, we are thinking as a firm who is part of a competitive market, right? That means that this particular individual is very small as compared to the entire market. जो हम perfectly competitive system का basic assumption है, atomistic economic agents, firms भी और buyers भी, sellers भी, they are very small as compared to the entire market. So these individuals are then taking everyone else's decisions, everyone else's behavior as given, and they can maximize their own utility, thinking about nothing else. But when we are thinking of situations like bargaining, right? Just think about it. तुम जाते हो किसी market में, if you guys have been to any sort of flea market, like in Delhi, you've been to Janpat, you've been to Sarojini, right? Or if you've seen your parents shop for vegetables also. This is something that we don't do anymore. That's something that we have stopped bargaining in the vegetables market. But कई बार तुमने देखा होगा कि जब वो सब्जी लेने जाते हैं या जब तुम किसी ऐसे दुकान में जा रहे हो जहाँ पे तुम्हें पता है कि there is no fixed MRP, there is scope for bargaining, right? Then the interaction that happens, that is a game theoretic situation, right? Because then you are basing your decision, how do you utilize a lot of information that is coming out of the seller, right? Or if you are the seller, that's coming out of the buyer. You're thinking that how you are not sure कि सामने वाले person का valuation कितना है इस good के लिए. You are not sure कि सामने वाला person अगले बार कैसे रिएक्ट करने वाला है. If you propose a price, the other person may concede, or the other person may say कि नहीं, I'm not selling this to you, right? So this kind of an interaction where the outcome and your own utility depends on what the other person is also doing, what the other person's action is, then you are in a strategic interaction. You're strategizing. You are basing your actions on other person's action profile. Okay, so we'll make all these terms more concrete, but this is just to give you some build up, right? The second example is what is called a bidding, or what is called an auction. So this is an example that your Siddharth sir gave you in the chat earlier. So when we are talking about any sort of bidding, like the 5G auction, right? Whenever government allocates, say any any task has to be undertaken, any government project has to be undertaken, the government will usually take out a tender. Tender means that it will take out a notice, right? It'll say release a notice that blah 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 task has to be done, and various bidders who are say if a bridge has to be built, right? Then various bidders who are construction companies in this case, these guys will submit their bids and the best bid wins, right? So submit their bids means they will tell you that exactly that okay, this is my total proposal, that I will do this work in this much cost, right? And they will also like give a bid actually is a very detailed document, so it will give you information about say everything, that every small and big cost, every kind of proposed manpower required, proposed machinery required, proposed technology that they are willing to use, proposed cost sharing arrangement, so everything, right? So anyways, the simplest is that I can do this job in this much money, and this bid is then, so multiple companies submit this bid, and since as a government or as anyone who has to shell out money, right, the aim is that I have to shell out the least money, but at the same time I have to also sort of take out the most value for money. So ऐसा नहीं है कि सबसे कम सस्ते में जो कर देगा वो बहुत ही फालतू काम करके दे देगा, तो then that is something that is desirable, right? So the most value for money. As a government chooses the best bid in the sense that whoever provides the most value for money. This is a very simplistic arrangement, but this is the idea. So when these people, these companies who are submitting their bids, they cannot be submitting their bids without taking into account what others are doing, right? So if suppose you are one of these companies and you submit a bid कि नहीं हम बहुत सस्ते में कर देंगे, right? You have to be aware that others may be putting in a lot of money, but they are putting it for quality, and the government also values quality. Okay? If you are someone, if you are thinking that okay, nay, I will, because I think so, this is what maximizes my utility, I value quality a lot, so I will just submit a bid that puts a lot of emphasis on quality, and I will make very good expenditure on that, and I will build the best bridge that there can be built with available technology. You have to be aware that others are probably compromising a little on quality but providing a better deal, and the government's agenda is also to minimize cost. right? So in these kind of situations, you cannot be making decisions in a vacuum. You cannot be treating others or the other economic agents that are present around you as passive. Okay? So these are the cases which game theory essentially studies, and these are not trivial, these are not small in number. As more and more you will realize that more and more interactions can be modeled as game theory. As soon as you start learning about oligopolistic markets, you have to deal with cases which are strategic, decisions which are strategic. Okay? All right. Other examples could be, is there a question? Okay. Other examples could be your political competition, right? अभी इंडिया में election हुआ, right? And you know how strategic those campaigns are, how strategic those promises are. एक party starts becoming populist, one party starts promising that, you know, this free, that free, you will see that every other party has to follow suit, right? Because it matters, your chances of winning depend on how others are behaving. Okay? So then political competition is there. Then you have game theory has also been used to model a lot of biological behavior on the part of animals, right? On the part of humans as well. So a lot of sibling interactions, how siblings interact and how their behavior towards each other evolves, that also can be modeled as game theory. Okay? A lot of animal interaction, how animals behave. So animal, say, fighting over prey. This also involves a lot of game theory, because I mean game theory, अब animals को तो पता नहीं है ना कि वो game theory के हिसाब से चल रहे हैं, वो अपने हिसाब से ही चल रहे हैं, but उनका behavior is essentially a game that they are playing because they are making decisions that are strategic. Right? Then again, you must, if you are interested in reading newspapers, which is obviously highly encouraged, you will see that India is trying to enter into a lot of trade agreements with different countries, and a lot of these decisions are highly strategic, right? So you have to डिसाइड कि कितना टैरिफ रखना है, कितना ड्यूटी लगाना है, कितना कंसेशन देना है सामने वाले को, कितना अपने देश में उनको फ्री एंट्री देना है, हाउ मच ऑफ देयर say FDA to allow, how much of their how much are you willing that they provide concession to their producers. क्योंकि अगर उनके प्रोड्यूसर कोई चीज़ सस्ते में प्रोड्यूस कर रहे हैं, so then your producers are at a disadvantage because their costs are not low, right? So all of these decisions are strategic. It depends that, okay, you have given me a concession in this particular industry, in this particular say supply chain, then I have to reciprocate, and my decision over here depends on what you did over there. So these are highly strategic decisions, right? And these are all modeled on game theory, right? So countries, say, are deciding upon, say, tariffs. ठीक है? और एग्जाम्पल, बहुत सारे एग्जाम्पल है ना, जैसे तुम आर्म्स रेस हो गया, कंट्रीज इन एन आर्म्स रेस, वाई डू दिस इज एक्चुअली अ वेरी cliche game theory model that we will in fact do, because I won't go into much detail about that over here. So yeah, other games we will look at when we are going through the course. Okay, बहुत सारे games करेंगे, but this is just an example of how pervasive this field is and how important it was to realize that this kind of behavior or this kind of decision making needs its very own field. ठीक है? तो let's go ahead. So we have covered what is game theory. Now let us, one word that I have been using very frequently just now is modeling, models. तो मैं कह रही हूँ तब से कि game theoretic तरीके से मॉडल कर सकते हैं. It can be modeled as a game theory. So what exactly is a model? Models, you are economic students, models तुमने अभी तक 2 सालों में you must have seen a lot of models, right? So what are models? Models are what? Nothing but essentially simplified versions of reality. Correct? ठीक है. क्यों हम मॉडल बनाते हैं? जैसे कि think of any example model that you can think, right? So you did a lot of modeling in your micro. You had a model for consumer demand, you had a model of market demand, you had a model of producer behavior, producer choice, right? Then you did macro में तो भर के models हैं. तुम classical model, then you do your Keynesian model, then you do your again in trade, if you have started doing trade में models हैं, right? हर जगह model हैं. तो मॉडल से हम क्या कर रहे हैं? वाई इज मॉडलिंग, वाई इज द अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ मॉडलिंग वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट? is because model is essentially, so we observe things that happen around us, right? We observe that people are behaving a certain way, say variables are moving a certain way. कभी GDP ऐसे जा रहा है, कभी हमारा employment इस तरफ जा रहा है, कभी inflation is going this way, कभी the stock market is going this way, कभी the consumer demand is going this way. There's a higher demand for this particular kind of product. There was a time when the coarse grains, millets and all, they were like nobody wanted to buy that, right? So those were essentially considered the grains which the poor consumed, right? And that essentially meant that was a fact that if the poor was consuming that grain was very cheap, that grain was dirt cheap, that grain was cheaper than your rice and wheat, right? And now suddenly due to various reasons, right? Some of the reasons that you're aware of, some of the reasons that you may not be aware of. Now we see that these have the prices of these grains has gone up, the demand for these grains have gone up, the desirability of these grains have gone up. The production costs remain the same, right? The production costs of these grains remain the same. If anything, they might have actually come down because the government wants to encourage that. So the government in a lot of places may be providing subsidies, may be providing some sort of financial or other kind of technical help for producing that. But with same or lower production cost, हमारा price ऊपर बढ़ चुका है, हमारा demand ऊपर बढ़ चुका है, right? So there are situations, there are kind of incentives that have been provided to public to behave this way, right? And under suppose this is what you observe, and now you want to understand that why did a certain thing happen the way it did. So what academics do, and this is not limited to economics, right? If some of you have studied science, you know that there are models in physics, there are models in chemistry, biology, everywhere. So modeling helps you that you have a very complex situation that you observe that बहुत सारी चीज़ें साथ में चल रही हैं, बतेरी चीज़ें इधर उधर मूव कर रही हैं. तुम्हें समझना है एक particular relation, like you have to clear the dust cloud, and you want to see a clear relationship that is essentially hiding behind that dust cloud, and a model helps you do that. So a model will do what? You have a complex situation, and it will do what? It will simplify it, it will bring it down to its bare essentials. ठीक है, जैसे हमने की कंज्यूमर डिमांड थ्योरी किया, राइट? डिमांड थ्योरी का मॉडलिंग किया. So we assume that one of the simplifying assumption was that individuals, this is one of the also fundamental assumptions that we will do now. It's called the rational choice theory, right? So we assume that individuals always make a rational choice. I'll get into what it means concretely, but this is a simplifying assumption because we know that sometimes individuals don't do that. Okay, another simplifying assumption is that say is there okay another simplifying assumption could be say in macro, when you are saying that suppose you are looking at the Keynesian theory, right? So then you said that in the Keynesian theory all laborers, right, they have money illusion. किया होगा, अगर macro में याद है, नहीं याद है तो एक बार देखना जाके. So money illusion means that all laborers do not want to bring their money wages down. Now this is a simplifying assumption because once you say that everyone is behaving the same, it simplifies the world. We know that at no point everyone in the world behaves the same, right? So then what this kind of assumption helps us, ये थोड़ा clutter कम कर देता है. बहुत सारी चीज़ें चल रही हैं, जब सब चीज़ को एक साथ देखने की कोशिश करोगे तो कुछ समझ में नहीं आएगा. सो अ मॉडल हेल्प्स यू like remove the clutter and only focus on thing that is important. ठीक है ना? So game theory will involve mostly models, right? So we will look at a lot of theoretical models. We will try and see that okay, individuals are behaving this way. Let us make a few assumptions about these individuals, and then we will see that what our model then predicts. ठीक है? तो what we will do is, so we will have a set of assumptions. Okay, and these assumptions are in this context nothing but what are called sufficient conditions. Have you done any bit of logic का कोई कोर्स किया है? Do they have the course of logic in I mean, is it I don't think it's part of the compulsory courses now. We used to have it. No. Okay, so let me just give you one example and then you can use it to understand what a sufficient condition is. As economic students, you should be aware of these kinds of statements because logic is very important in model building. It's very important in giving any kind of economic argument. It will be very important in any kind of proofs that you do. Okay? So suppose there is a statement like if A then B. ठीक है? एग्जाम्पल ले लेते हैं. सपोज हम कहते हैं कि इफ ए इज दैट इफ इट रेन्स देन द ग्राउंड इज वेट, राइट? सो देन इट मीन्स दैट वी आर making a statement. This entire thing is called a statement, right? The first part, A is called a proposition and B is called the conclusion. ठीक है ना? So your A this is what is called a proposition and your B is what is called a conclusion. Okay, now you can, whenever you want to understand that what is a necessary condition and what is a sufficient condition, think of it this way. If it rains, then the ground gets wet. Okay, the ground getting wet, what is sufficient for it to happen? It's sufficient that it rained for the ground to get wet. ठीक है ना? अगर बारिश हुई है तो वो sufficient है to ensure that the ground got wet. Think about a normal बारिश. Don't think about some of the बारिश that we have in Delhi where it rains and then it just vanishes. ठीक है ना? A normal बारिश कि बारिश हुई, that is sufficient for the ground to get wet. But it is not necessary for the ground. It is raining is not necessary for the ground to get wet. Okay? तुम पानी पटा दो, ग्राउंड वैसे ही गीला हो जाना है. ठीक है ना? तो अगर बारिश होती है, बारिश इज सफिशिएंट टू एंश्योर दैट द ग्राउंड इज वेट, बट इट इज नॉट नेसेसरी. ऑलराइट, सो व्हेनेवर यू हैव अ स्टेटमेंट लाइक दिस, ए विल ऑलवेज बी योर सफिशिएंट कंडीशन. इट्स कॉल्ड द सफिशिएंट कंडीशन. एंड नाउ थिंक ऑफ बी. बी जो है, B is necessary for A. How? If the ground is wet, right? Now think of it the other way. Suppose you observe that the ground is wet. In that case, is it sufficient to conclude that it rained? No. Ground can be wet due to other reasons, right? But अगर ground wet नहीं होता, तब तुम पक्के से कह सकते थे कि बारिश नहीं हुई है. So to conclude that it rained, you have to ensure it is necessary that the ground was wet. Necessary condition for A and sufficient condition for B. Alright, so if you remember this kind of example, it will be easier for you to, go back and forth. I'll just give you another example so that just जिसको जो याद रखना हो वैसे याद रख सकता है. Suppose A is that if, say, someone is a biological father I'm saying biological because it can be the case that someone is, biological is important over here. If someone is a biological father, then the person is a biological male. Okay, so again think of it that if someone is a biological father, that is sufficient information to conclude that someone is a biological male. ठीक है, नेसेसरी नहीं है, बिना फादर हुए भी कोई मेल हो सकता है, ठीक है ना, बट अगर फादर है तो दैट इज सफिशिएंट इंफॉर्मेशन टू कंक्लूड दैट द पर्सन इज ऑल्सो अ बायोलॉजिकल मेल. Going the other way around, if someone is a male, that is not sufficient to conclude that someone is also a father, but that's definitely necessary, right? So using these two examples, you can think of necessary and sufficient conditions. This is something very useful for any kind of economic or otherwise argument that you make. So whenever we are in a model, we make this kind of statement. For a model, these assumptions are the assumptions are the sufficient conditions. For a model, if the set of assumptions hold, then the conclusions follow. ठीक है? So any model will essentially come down to, so a model will come down to, so if assumptions, then conclusion. Right? So going back to the Kinjan example, if you remember, if labor market has money illusion, then you will see involuntary unemployment in the in equilibrium in the economy. ठीक है? So money illusion is a sufficient condition for this conclusion. तो हम भी इसी टाइप के मॉडल्स करेंगे. हमारे पास कुछ बेसिक assumptions होंगे which will follow through all models, and then for every different kind of game we will have that extra assumption that will be added. Okay, so don't worry, don't get overwhelmed right now. Let's take it stepwise. So one fundamental assumption that is there in all models, and essentially also all economic models, all traditional economic models, is what is called the assumption of rationality. Okay, so let's understand what this assumption of rationality is. Okay, so it is also called the theory of rational choice. Okay, it's essentially an assumption. It's an assumption of how people behave. अगर हमको कुछ चीज़ ट्रैक्टेबल बनानी है तो हमको कुछ we have to deal with people who are not crazy, right? Who are consistent in their behavior, who are not erratic. तुम किसी चीज़ को systematically तभी study कर सकते हो when you are able to observe systematic patterns. Right? So if something is extremely random, then there's no point in studying that, and in fact you cannot use that random pattern to actually do something about some other thing that you want to study. So हम ये assume करते हैं that all decision makers are essentially rational, right? So decision makers are rational, and this rational essentially implies that all decision makers choose the best option according to their preferences. ठीक है ना? So this is something that you have already come across in micro theory, I'm sure, a lot, where you are जो भी तुमने वेरिएंट में या जहाँ से भी किया होगा, you have this rationality a lot, so I will not go into a lot of detail over here, but rationality, this assumption is very crucial for all Gohin theoretic models as well. ठीक है? So थोड़ा सा डिटेल में हम जाएंगे about two terms. The first is option, right, and the second is preferences. सो हमको ये पता है कि कोई भी हमारा जनरली इन माइक्रो थ्योरी ऑल्सो द जनरल अजम्पशन इज दैट वी हैव यूटिलिटी मैक्सिमाइजिंग इंडिविजुअल्स, वी हैव प्रॉफिट मैक्सिमाइजिंग फर्म्स, ठीक है ना. तो इसमें भी हमारे जो इंडिविजुअल्स हैं वो अपना यूटिलिटी मैक्सिमाइज कर रहे हैं. दैट्स द सेम थिंग. जस्ट दैट नाउ दे हैव earlier, suppose if they had to maximize their utility depending they had to choose a bundle that maximize their utility, right? Similarly here also they will have to choose an action that maximizes their utility. Okay, so we have two things over here. The first one is the action. So individuals have a set of action which are also, you can say, choices, ऑप्शंस, ठीक है ना. गेम थ्योरी में हम जनरली इनको एक्शंस बोलेंगे, राइट. एंड द सेकेंड, सो एट एनी गिवन टाइम यू मे हैव whatever is available to you may be a subset of the total subset of the full action set. Suppose you can choose between 0 and 100 amount of 0 and 100 apples, right? बट डिपेंडिंग ऑन योर बजट सपोज इसका एक सबसेट ही चूज कर सकते हो 0 से 50 के बीच में, ठीक है. सो यू मे हैव अ सबसेट ऑफ द फुल सेट दैट मे बी अवेलेबल टू यू एट अ गिवन पॉइंट इन टाइम, राइट. सेकेंडली इज योर प्रेफरेंस. प्रेफरेंस हम कर चुके हैं फिर से, राइट. इन माइक्रो वी हैव ऑलरेडी डन दैट. सो प्रेफरेंस आर एसेंशियली representation of what gives a person utility, right, from various kinds of outcomes, ठीक है. सो बेसिकली प्रेफरेंसेस रिप्रेजेंट यूटिलिटी, ठीक है. वन इम्पॉर्टेंट थिंग इज दैट देर इज जस्ट लाइक इन माइक्रो थ्योरी, नो जजमेंट इज प्लेस्ड ऑन व्हाट अ पर्सन प्रेफर्स, ठीक है ना. तो ऐसा ज़रूरी नहीं है कि हर बंदा अच्छा ही हो, ठीक है ना. We are allowing for people to prefer anything. We can say that people are extremely selfish, right? So we allow for decision makers who not only want to maximize their own utility, they want to see others go down, right? Earlier, the difference over here that we move from micro theory to game theory is that earlier we said, so this is what we had earlier in micro theory, that the utility of individual A depends only on the bundle that A has. मेरे पास कितने सेब हैं, मेरे पास कितने संतरे हैं, ठीक है. How much I have determines my utility. But now with game theory, utility of individual A is allowed to depend, may or may not, right, but it will depend on what my bundle is of individual A as well as what is the bundle of individual B, which may be the other player, और जितने भी player हैं, ठीक है ना. इसका मतलब ये है कि now we are allowing for individual utility to depend on what are the actions and outcomes of other individuals, right. So this is an important distinction from micro theory. We are allowing that individuals now have a preference over actions taken by other people as well, and the reason is that those actions affect this individual as well, right. So we can allow individuals to be selfish. These individuals want not only their own welfare to be maximized, probably they want that no one else should get anything else, right. So suppose they are deriving utility from owning something that is uniquely only with them. सबके पास आ जाए तो उनको पसंद नहीं आता, right. Or we can have altruistic preferences as well. We can have individuals who उनको तब ज़्यादा खुशी मिलती है कि जब उनके पास भी कुछ हो बट सामने वालों के पास भी हो. So they would rather have say a lower amount themselves and at the same time others also possessing the same thing than have all the amount to themselves and those others in front of them being, say, destitute or being deprived, right. So there is no judgment that is placed on what preferences an individual has. All kinds of preferences are allowed. The rationality comes when we are talking about कि जिसके जैसे preferences हैं उस हिसाब से उसके choices होने चाहिए, right? So if someone is selfish by preference, then this individual should not be choosing an action such that her own say bundle is lower and everyone else also gets something, when in fact there was an option available when others like there was an option available जब वो बाकियों का सामान भी खुद ले जा सकती थी, right? So if this individual is selfish by nature, has a selfish preference, and this individual is making a choice like this individual is then not rational. And we are ruling out such individuals. We are saying that if someone is selfish, if it is up to them, अगर उनके पास ये action, ये जो action है, ये जो set availability है, अगर उसमें option है उनके पास, they should be maximizing their utility. They should be choosing a bundle in which they get everything and others get nothing, if that's an option. जितना भी extent तक ये possible है वो करना चाहते हैं, right? That is how rationality is defined. Earlier this others feature was not there, but now with game theory सबके actions से तुम्हें फर्क पड़ता है, ठीक है? So the theory of rational choice essentially is that whatever set of actions, set of choices anyone has, any decision maker will choose the action that is best, right? Or that is at least as good as any other action that is available, ठीक है? So it may be the case कि दो actions से बराबर utility मिल रही हो, so then anything can be chosen. But if there is any action that is giving you a slightly higher utility also, you have to go with that. Okay, so that is the theory of rational choice. Is this absolutely clear? I'm sorry, Rajesh, you're the only one, so you will have to answer. Thank you. Okay, so before we formally begin with games, let us also discuss what a payoff function is. Right? So payoff function is nothing but utility functions. These are your utility functions. You have done utility functions in your micro. Here, na, utility function, when they take particular functional forms, Cobb-Douglas हो गया, या say you have your क्या नाम है, utilitarian, you have your perfect complements. You have done all these, right? So the only difference over here is that we will generally we will not be dealing with okay, great, so you've done. So generally we will not be dealing with proper functional forms. We will just be dealing with any numbers that capture the ordinal information, right? So we know that what payoff functions are. Payoff functions are, say, mathematical representations of preferences, ठीक है, ये हमको पता है. So if this is a utility, right? So this is a function from your action space to your utility space, है ना? And you denote, suppose you have any action A and B, utility from action A is this much, utility from action B is this much. All these belong to your action space. Right? So just like we have an x and y plane, यहाँ पे all your actions are plotted. Say A, B, C, D, ये सारे actions available हैं तुम्हें, and यहाँ पे your utility is plotted. Right? So for every action, you have a particular utility. Right? Given this action, इससे इतना utility, इससे इतना utility, इससे इतना, इससे इतना. This is your utility function. This is, in game theory, the term that you will come across is what is called the payoff function. But they are essentially the same. ठीक है ना? So if we have a utility function, now we will not deal with a particular functional form. उस झंझट में हमें नहीं पढ़ना है. We will just say that suppose you represents utility of an individual. This will be the case if, for example, UA is greater, whatever number you're getting from A is greater than the utility number that you're getting from B, if and only if the individual prefers A over B. ये prefers का साइन था, right? तो अगर इंडिविजुअल का प्रेफरेंस जो भी A एक्शन लेने से जो भी आउटकम आ रहा है, अगर इंडिविजुअल वो आउटकम को प्रेफर करता है over B, then your utility function, your payoff function should capture that. Alright, if and only if means that the causation, the direction is both ways. If this is true, then this is true, and if this is true, then this is true. Alright. ठीक है? So this is what a utility function is. Now, important point to note that is that a utility function will only capture ordinal information, right? So we have, so this is important, where we know that preferences only ordinal information, right? So if we say that A is preferred over B, that is all we know. हमको ये नहीं पता कि how much is A preferred over B. So if we say that A is preferred over B, B is preferred over C, then in no way can any preference tell us that A is preferred over B more than B is preferred over C. ये information है ही नहीं इसमें. All that matters is, all that is captured in any preference function is that A is preferred over B and B is preferred over C. The strength of this preference is not the information that any preference has. ठीक है, मतलब by construction, ठीक है ना? नहीं तो हम वो कार्डिनल वाले जोन में पहुंच जाते हैं, and then that is problematic for various other reasons. ठीक है? So since this is the case, then any payoff function that represents a preference, this implies that payoff functions are also only ordinal. Right? So you can assign the utility to A as 10 and utility to B as 5, or you can assign utility to A as 2 and utility to B as 1.5. Same information. This does not say that here you prefer A, double you prefer B, and here it does not say that you prefer A less than you preferred, or you preferred, or the preference for A is weaker in this case as it was in this case. ऐसा कोई भी statement हम नहीं कहेंगे. तो हम random numbers दे सकते हैं. The only thing that matters is कि वो numbers का order preference का order match करें. Okay, so that also means that any increasing function of say A, इसको A की जगह अगर हम V लिख देते हैं, right? So you have V of A and V of B. This is one function, this is another function. As long as this function, suppose, is an increasing function. If U is an increasing function of V, whenever V goes up, U goes up, both will represent the same preference. ठीक है, monotonic transformation अगर किया है, so that is what it means. A monotonic transformation can be in either direction. So this is a monotonic transformation of U in the downward direction, and U is a monotonic transformation of V in the upward direction. Is this clear? Now I just want to start with games today, क्योंकि I don't think we will have time to start with the simultaneous games, but I do want to start with games today. So it's clear? चलें फिर? Alright. So now let's formally begin games. ये इतनी सारी कहानी मैंने इसलिए सुनाई क्योंकि कहानी के बैकग्राउंड के बिना सीधे गेम्स में कूद जाने में समझ में नहीं आती हैं चीज़ें. ओके, सो आई हैव बीन टीचिंग गेम थ्योरी एंड आई हैव सीन दिस हैपन मल्टीपल टाइम्स. There will be students who can solve games but they have no idea what a game is, right? So we need to make our understanding much better than that so that we actually understand what games are, what a strategic decision making is. ठीक है. So games को शुरू करने से पहले हमको मतलब शुरू करेंगे, अब हम कर दिया. So what we are doing is, the first thing that we will need to do is we need to break it down into simpler or into categories. How that helps us is that if we have categories, say in increasing order of difficulty, then we can start this with the simplest and we can move to higher level of difficulty. Now this is something that we generally do. If we understand the simplest, then it's better to move up the ladder and start complicating things one by one. Okay? So the way we will categorize games is on the basis of the information that a particular game has. Okay, so let's do this. So there are two kinds of information required in any game you play, right? So think of yourself as a player, और बहुत ज़्यादा बड़ा लंबा चौड़ा गेम भी नहीं खेलना है. Just think of लूडो. ठीक. So think of two kinds of games. एक लूडो सोचो और एक सोचो रॉक पेपर सिजर. ठीक है ना. So the first kind of information is the information about the other players move या action. मतलब कि जब तुम्हारी बारी आई खेलने की तो क्या तुम्हें पता है कि सामने वाले ने क्या चाल चल चुका है सामने वाला, right? Or whether you don't know it. So when you are playing Ludo, whenever it's your turn to play, you know what the other person has done previously, right? But when you are playing rock paper scissors, you don't know that. You are putting your rock or paper or scissors simultaneously, and the very first rule of the game is that you have to do it at the same time. Okay, so this is an information. Ludo is the example of a game in which players are moving sequentially, right? And rock paper scissors is an example of game where players are moving simultaneously. Which also means that in this game, when suppose you are making a move, you do not have information about the other player's move, whereas in Ludo you do. So that's one way to classify games in which players have information about the other player's move before they make their move, and games in which players make the move without knowing what the other player has done. Okay, the second is information about the preferences of other players. Right? Now in this case again think of say rock paper scissors या लूडो. ठीक है ना. इसमें तुम्हें पता है कि सामने वाले बंदे का प्रेफरेंस है टू गेट ऑल द गोटी into the like center वाला box as soon as possible. सबका प्रेफरेंस सेम है, right? So even if you do not know the person who you're playing with, you know that the aim of the person is that is the outcome that will give the person the maximum utility, right? So तुम्हें उसका प्रेफरेंस पता है. इसी गेम का एक वेरिएशन ये हो सकता है जैसे कि there are some players who in Ludo itself there are some players who are only concerned with moving their goatees the fastest and getting to the center spot, right? And then there are players like me who also place a lot of importance on cutting the other person's goatee, right? So if you are unsure about what the other person's preference is, right, then that is one less unit of information that you have. So a game can differ on whether you have information about the preference of the other person or you don't have information about the preference of the other person. Right? So when it's say your turn to move, you did observe what the other person did, right? Because Ludo is a game where you have information about the move of the other player, but because it's a you move, I move, you move, I move, then if you suppose move a goatee which puts you in a spot that I can cut, then it becomes difficult for you to judge कि मैं क्या करने वाली हूँ, हाँ, मैं वो गोटी काटने वाली हूँ या मैं अपनी गोटी को आगे ले जाने वाली हूँ, right? So this kind of informational availability again helps you categorize games into two categories. एक जिसमें कि प्लेयर्स को पता है, सपोज कोई अगर लूडो का गेम है जिसमें कि गोटी काटने अलाउड ही नहीं है, तो तब तो ऐसा इन्फॉर्मेशनल एसिमेट्री आएगा ही नहीं, है ना. बट अगर कोई गेम है जिसमें कि अलाउड है, सो देन यू आर इन दैट गेम. अगेन थिंक अबाउट बार्गेनिंग. व्हेन यू आर इन द शॉप बार्गेनिंग, फरोजनी में कभी अगर बार्गेनिंग की होगी, तुमने जो मार्केट प्राइस बोल दिया, तुम्हें पता नहीं है एग्जैक्टली कि व्हाट इज द वर्थ, एक्चुअल वर्थ ऑफ द आइटम. यू ऑल्सो डोंट नो हाउ मच द सेलर मतलब वैल्यूज दैट आइटम, राइट. देन the move that you make, the price that you quote, you don't know exactly के सामने वाले का preference utility function क्या है, कितना वैल्यू कर रहा है वो सामने वाले प्रोडक्ट को, ठीक है. सो देन वी आर इन द zone of games where the information about the preference of other players is unknown to, and सामने उसको भी नहीं पता है, सेलर को भी नहीं पता है कि तुम किस पॉइंट पे पलट जाओगे, है ना. सो देन वी आर इन द realm where this information is unavailable to players. ठीक है. सो दैट मीन्स दैट देर आर एसेंशियली 4 कैटेगरीज. सो यू विल हैव 4 categories. You will have one information about move, one kind of information. The other kind of information will be about payoff, right. There are 4, like 2 kinds in each. So one kind of game is where the move is known. The other is where the move is unknown, known and unknown. UK. ठीक है. There are games in which you know the preference and you know सामने वाले ने कैसे move किया, ठीक है, जैसे कि लूडो जिसमें काटना अलाउड नहीं है. Then there are games in which you know the move but you don't know the preference. लूडो जिसमें काटना अलाउड है, ठीक है ना. And then there are games when you don't know the move and you know the preference, right, like rock paper scissors. And finally you are in this zone when neither of them is known, ठीक है. So the way we will address these games, the order in which we will go about is we will start with this, okay, then we will go here, then we will go here, and finally we will cover this. So the game where players are moving simultaneously but they know each other's preference is the game that is the simplest to analyze. इसी को बोलते हैं जो ऑसबॉर्न में तुम्हारे if you've seen, which is called the strategic game, or which is called static game, or which is called simultaneous move game, like हमारा rock paper scissors. हम यहाँ से शुरू करेंगे, ठीक है. These games are the simplest to analyze. Then we will move to games in which the move is known. So these games bring the next level of difficulty. फिर हम उस level of difficulty में जाते हैं जहाँ पे pay off unknown. इन दोनों cases में सामने वाले के pay off तुम्हें पता है, कोई confusion नहीं है कि सामने वाले को किस चीज़ से maximum utility मिल रही है, ठीक. Then you will move to the kind of game in which you do not know कि सामने वाला चाहता क्या है, ठीक है. और तब भी again we will do these 2 categories. So the 4 will be the toughest games to analyze. The 1 will be the simplest. We will start over here. All right. So I will stop here. Okay. I had planned that I will go over the simultaneous move game, but let's keep the session to an hour, because the longer it gets, it also gets difficult for you guys to revisit it later. So we'll keep sessions of 1 hour. I did go very slow today and I did cover a lot of material which was introductory and which maybe some of you have already done, but for the sake of completeness and for the sake of taking everyone on board, I chose to do this. Next session say, you will be informed about that in advance too. Next session say, we will keep things, we'll keep on doing examples that are from our real life that give us more intuition, but we will get to, we'll get to business quickly. ठीक है, so आज जैसा पेस है, ये पेस इंट्रोडक्टरी पेस था, आगे से we will speed it up a bit. All right. Okay, is there a question, is there a doubt or something? Thank you, Ayushi. It was great. I am really happy that it was helpful, and I do hope to see more of you next time, because it's always better if we have people live. But I understand that you guys have classes and all, so that's okay. But you are there on the group, है ना? तो ग्रुप पे ही अगर कोई क्वेश्चन वगैरह हो तो मेरे को पूछना, ठीक है ना? और फिर अगले सेशन के लिए मिलते हैं फटाफट. थैंक यू राजेश. Rajesh was the only one who was available the entire time. Thanks.